You are formed and framed by the people around you, yes, but also by the media you consume. And yet, it is undeniable that you have an innate essence that you are oftentimes born with. In the simplest of terms, you have a soul. And that very soul is nurtured by the people and media you interact with. And when that essence is queer or LGBTQ, then I at least believe it is best to nurture that soul with media that properly represents that experience. Hi, I'm Alex. You may know me from many different videos, most recent of which was my Christian duel with Bacon Guy, a fellow YouTuber. And this duel for the ages got me rethinking about the impact of media on our lives, about how stories shape us. I've talked in the channel before about this concept, and I want this video to be the definitive version of that from the queer perspective, because media matters. And going off of that, queer media matters. The action of simply seeing two same-sex characters in love can be monumental to the self-actualization of many LGBTQ+ folks, young or old. And in an age where people attack or even demonize these kinds of films, books, or games, I want to defend it. I want to stand up for it. Because I know it matters to other people. And I know it matters to me. As I said, stories serve to shape who we are. And my wording there is important. It shapes, but does not fully construct. I've honestly been back and forth in my thoughts and subsequent discussion on free will, and the soul, and what have you. And I'm unsure where I lie anymore, but for today's purposes, know that being gay, or trans, or anything related to being LGBTQ+, is not something you are forced into, contrary to the thoughts of the current US political landscape. Sure, queer media can help influence you, but it doesn't suddenly make you gay. Rather, if you are able to be influenced by the gay agenda, then you probably already had something in your essence that was leaning that way to begin with. This is something you are born with, at least most of the time. And while I've discussed in the channel before that some parents do pressure their kids into things like transitioning, just know that these cases are so few and far between that they do not merit being at the forefront of the conversation, and yet sadly some people have made it that way. No. Instead, when I say these people and stories help shape you, but do not construct you, what I mean is that two dudes kissing on screen won't make you gay, but that if it makes you question your sexuality, then there is probably something there already. And honestly, contrary to popular belief, questioning these things is often a good thing. Life, especially early on, is a journey of self-discovery. This is normal. But where people suddenly don't think it's normal is when someone, especially younger folks, question their sexuality or even their gender identity. And what I think this comes down to, plain and simple, though quite complex at the same time, is covert homophobia and transphobia. They feel as if these thoughts or this behavior is abnormal when all potentially queer kids and adults are doing is questioning. And if it turns out they find themselves more comfortable with a different gender expression or sexual orientation, then great. I quite literally don't see what is wrong with that. Although I realize I wasn't always that way. I'll be talking about my own earlier bigoted beliefs later on in this very video. What stories do then is help guide those in their search for themselves. From an extremely early age, media influences us. Again, it shapes us. A lot of the time it's in harmless ways or even beneficial ways, but of course, this isn't always the case. Things like the male gaze or the white gaze can often come into play here. See my mouthwashing analysis for my thoughts on the former, linked in the description and end card, and I still have to cover the latter, but will be at some point. But when it comes to queer representation, I see it as virtually always being a good thing, because it can help a lot of people. And to all the parents out there, be patient with your kids and help guide them through the media they consume. They'll have questions, yes, but questions are normal, and I feel like if you're a parent, I don't have to even tell you that. I obviously can't tell you what to tell them, or even what to watch or read or play in the first place, but kindness goes a long way, and you don't know what they're going through or experiencing. When a young kid or older adult see a trans, gay, or non-binary character on screen, and they have similar emotions, feelings, and thoughts to that character, they feel seen. And I cannot stress to you how important that is. Self-actualizing is defined as finding your full potential. And when they say that, I interpret that as finding yourself in your truest form and fully living that way without shame or guilt. We don't live in a perfect world. For today's case, we see homophobia and transphobia everywhere. But it's creators who dare to buck the corporate trend, even when it has suddenly become unpopular to show gay or trans characters on the screen, that matters so much. Representation matters so much. And I understand that sometimes these characters are just shoehorned in, thrown into a store without consideration for no other reason than to have them there. And honestly, while I don't necessarily agree with that from a writing perspective, I mean, you should be writing in-depth, sometimes thematically relevant characters in your stories, I also don't see it as some evil, manipulative practice, at least most of the time, and we'll get to that in a second. What I do see it as is a start. Not a perfect one by any means, but a start nonetheless. Again, please write intriguing LGBTQ plus characters, people, but others often just demonize their existence in the story. Just as writers can sometimes include these characters just for the sake of it, sometimes audience members will trash their inclusion just for the sake of it. I think we need to find a middle ground here, and realize that sometimes just having a non-fetishized gay couple on screen or in the pages can mean so much without having to have a deeper reason for it. To all the creators out there, the most important thing when including LGBTQ plus characters isn't really thematic relevance quite so much, at least I don't think so. Rather, all I ask is that you write human characters. Because 1, you should be doing that anyway, and 2, because queer folks are obviously human and deserve to be represented as much. I think we focus too much on that thematic relevance and not as much on the personal nuance of the characters. And I'm not saying, dear God, just try and profit off LGBTQ plus people, but just represent them as humans. That's all. And sure, you can call me woke, but I really want you to think about it for a second here. Like I said, I do want deep and nuanced characters in every story I consume, but not only are straight romances thrown into stories for no discernible reason, I also want representation. And obviously they can go hand in hand like I literally just talked about, and probably should. Because society is shaped by the stories that it tells, and normalizing LGBTQ plus people in media is the first step in normalizing them in society. When a young gay, trans, or non-binary kid sees themselves represented on the screen, they will feel closer to self-actualization in themselves. And look, I know it's not perfect. I know these media corporations usually just want to sell more stuff and will form-fit themselves to the current political climate more often than not. It's not entirely dependable, to say the least. In a perfect world, the person wouldn't need stories to tell them it's okay to be gay. They would feel fully accepted in society, and more importantly, they would fully accept themselves anyway. But we don't live in a perfect world. This is why we need representation of marginalized groups. so kids and adults can see themselves on screen. Even if you think it's shallow, or it's cheap, or a shoo-in, it's something. And in the world we live in, maybe that's okay for now. Again, it's definitely not the end point, but it's certainly a start. But representation doesn't just directly matter to marginalized groups. It also matters in the way of unlearning certain beliefs. Can I be honest with you for a second? Oscar TV, admittedly used to be pretty homophobic, especially towards gay men. While I did always support gay marriage on a political level, even I used to repeat mantras such as, I don't care what you do, but just don't do it in front of me. I didn't yet realize that self-actualization is often dependent on being your full self in public, based on the whole collective consciousness thing, but also didn't really care. I thought that people should legally be able to kiss whatever gender they wanted, but I didn't want them to show it. I was just deeply uncomfortable with it, and projected that discomfort into what I actually believed. Of course, it took me a long time to realize that much of my homophobia came from my own experiences with SA at the hands of a male, but that isn't an excuse. At least, not to me, and not right now. We have to be better, and I'm not saying you have to have this great shame about the beliefs you used to hold, but you should work to change them. That's what I think, at least. Because, simply put, people deserve to be happy and comfortable in who they actually are, and nothing less. And I'm happy to report that I don't feel uncomfortable around gay men anymore, in no small part to what I've been talking about today. I think representation in stories can help with this destigmatization. After all, bigoted beliefs are things that aren't innate. Rather, they're taught to us. And just as they are taught to us, they can be untaught. Again, it's not perfect, but a good first step to doing that is the normalization of LGBTQ plus characters and themes in the stories we tell, the stories we consume. And I share this uncomfortable part of myself for a reason, to show you that anyone can deprogram what they've been taught by society. The stories can shape you into a more accepting person. If you get anything out of this video, make it this. Before you immediately turn your nose up at a story that has LGBTQ plus characters or story beats, just think about why you're doing that for a second. Like, really put your mind to it. And then think about all the stories that have impacted you up until this point, and all the stories you will experience in the future. And finally, let the right stories shape you. The ones that accept, represent, and lend to self-actualization. This, friends, is why queer media matters. And, as always, thank you for watching.